They said the knock would only be about the linen, and it was Hester Wren who answered it, because Hester always answered doors before anyone else in the house had finished deciding whether to be afraid of them. She would remember that knock longest, afterward, though on the morning it came she thought it no more than a tradesman's fist. Through the crack of her stepmother's sitting room door, before the knock and after it, she heard the sentence that would follow her the length of a county. "He will take her because he must take someone," said Lady Prudence Wren, not troubling to lower her voice, since nervous girls were not thought to matter enough to overhear things meant for calm ones, and nervous girls make useful wives. They notice everything and blame themselves for it after. Cordelia, who was the calm one, who had been born calm the way some people are born with good teeth, murmured something sympathetic and entirely satisfied. Hester did not open the door on that sentence. She opened it on the tradesman's knock a moment later, with her face already arranged, because arranging her face was the second thing she had learned to do well in this world, after counting exits, and she had had a great deal of practice at both. She was 24, plain in the unremarkable way of a person nobody had ever thought worth cataloging feature by feature, and she had spent 12 years being the daughter one kept in the corner of a room the way one keeps a fire screen, useful, unlovely, forgotten until needed. The proposal had come, in fact, from a duke, which ought to have made Lady Prudence delighted rather than merely relieved, but the Duke of Alderley was a man 12 years widowed of a mother he had never stopped mourning, master of a house with one wing still black, timbered, from a fire that had taken his brother and half his family's peace along with the roof, and no one in the county considered him a prize so much as a duty owed to. Someone spare enough to be spent on it. Hester was to be married in something under a month to a stranger in a house that had already burned once. She packed her mother's small brass bell in the bottom of her trunk under her shifts where Lady Prudence would not see it, and remark that a bride ought not travel with kitchen fittings. 19 days, the letter from Alderley Hall had said, until the Michaelmas ball that would reopen the rebuilt East Wing to the county for the first time since the fire. 19 days in which a new duchess was somehow to be found, fitted, and made presentable, and Hester noted the number the way she noted every number that mattered, filing it where she filed the position of every door in every room she entered, a habit so old she no longer felt herself performing it. She only knew, climbing into the carriage that would carry her 3 days north, that she counted the door of it before she counted anything else, out of an instinct planted in her so long ago she could not now separate the woman from the habit. Her mother had taught her that counting, once, in a kitchen that no longer existed. "Count the doors before you count your blessings," Rosamond Wren used to say, half in earnest, half as a joke to soften it, and Hester had gone on doing it for 12 years after there was any joke left in the saying at all. The Duke of Alderley met her in a hall smelling of new plaster and old smoke, and his first words to her were not a greeting. "You flinched when the door closed," he said, watching her with the stillness of a man accustomed to reading rooms for danger before he read them for company. "Everyone does at first. It will stop." Hester did not deny it. "It flinched at me first," she said. "I only returned the courtesy." Something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile, filed away and gone before she could be certain of it. He was a large man, made larger by grief, grave-voiced, with a groundskeeper's hands on a duke's wrists, and he looked at her the way a man looks at an inventory he has been handed against his wishes, not unkindly, only warily, as though she might yet prove to be the wrong entry. "My aunt manages the house," he said, "Lady Seraphina Vane. She will tell you what is expected. I am told you are the nervous sister. He said it without cruelty, only as a fact reported to him by people he trusted, and Hester felt the old familiar flattening in her chest that came whenever the label was laid on her like a coat she had not chosen and could not remove. I am told that too, she said, often enough that I have begun to wonder whether it is a name or a diagnosis. That earned the almost smile fully this time, brief as a struck match. I do not want a calm wife, Miss Wren, he said, and something in his voice dropped a register into a place she suspected few people were permitted to hear. I had a calm house once. Everyone kept their composure beautifully while it burned to the ground. He did not explain further, and she did not ask him to. She only understood, in the way she understood weather before it broke, that she had just been told something true disguised as something offhand, and she filed it as carefully as she filed doors. Lady Seraphina Vane arrived within the hour to inspect her, moving through the hall the way a fine knife moves through wax, and her voice when she spoke was gentler than anyone's in the room, which Hester noted was itself worth noting. So this is the sister they could spare, Lady Seraphina said, and smiled with real warmth while she said it, smoothing her black glove finger by finger as though counting something in it. How fortunate that Alderley does not require beauty, only steadiness. Hester met her eyes and did not look away first. I have been called many things this month, she said. Steady has not yet been one of them. I shall try to earn it before the ball. Lady Seraphina's smile did not move, though something behind it recalculated. 19 days, she said, is not very long to become a duchess. No, Hester agreed. It is a very short time to become anything. I have generally found it long enough to notice what is wrong in a house. However, she said it lightly, meaning nothing more than a small return volley in a small duel of manners, and did not yet know that she had just told the one lie she would need her whole stay to disprove, for she had already noticed something wrong. In the very hall where they stood, a scorch mark on the new plaster near the archive door, carefully painted over but not quite hidden, old enough to predate the rebuilding, and a smell beneath the fresh paint that was not smoke exactly, but the ghost of lamp oil, spilled and never fully scrubbed away. She would remember, later, that she had seen it on her very first afternoon, and said nothing, because saying things before you were certain of them was not, in this house or her father's, a habit that had ever been rewarded. She learned the house the way she had learned every house of her life, by its exits first and its people second, and in learning it, she found Nurse Griggs, who had come north with her trunk and her bell and no other friend in the world, installed in the housekeeper's parlor within a day, cracking her knuckles at the new servants with the frank tyranny of a woman who had raised 2 daughters and buried one mistress and did not intend to be impressed by a duke's silver. He's grave as a churchyard, that one, Griggs observed, over tea Hester had not asked for and drank anyway, but I'll say this for him. He looks at you when you speak, which is more than your stepmother's husband ever managed for his own children. He asked whether I was the nervous sister, Hester said. And are you? Griggs asked, not looking up from her mending. I have never once in my life been nervous about a fire I could see coming, Hester said. Only about the ones everyone insists are not there. Griggs's needle paused half a beat, no more, and went on. Your mother used to say something of the sort, she said. Ring first. Explain after. She'd have liked this house, God rest her, for all its burning. She always did say a house that has already lost something is more careful of what remains. It was the closest either of them came, that first week, to speaking of the kitchen fire 12 years gone. The one that had taken Rosamond Wren and left her elder daughter with a reputation for jumping at doors, and Hester let the subject close again as gently as it had opened, filing it, as she filed everything for later. The county came to call within the fortnight, as counties do when a duke is finally to be married, and among them came Miss Honoria Blackwood, beautiful and precise as a well-kept ledger, who had for 2 seasons been understood by everyone but the Duke himself to be the likeliest future Duchess. She looked at Hester across the drawing room, the way one looks at an error discovered too late to correct, and her voice, when she spoke, had all the gentleness Lady Seraphina's had, and none of its warmth. "How resourceful of the Wrens," Miss Blackwood said, "to find a use for the daughter who could not otherwise be placed." Hester set down her cup without letting it rattle in the saucer, which she had trained herself to do the way other women trained themselves to dance. "It is resourceful of any family," she said, "to send the daughter who notices things to a house that has already burned once. One hopes it will not need noticing twice." She did not look at Lady Seraphina when she said it, but she felt, rather than saw, the older woman's glove smoothing paws for exactly 1 finger longer than it should have, and she filed that too, the way she filed doors, without yet knowing what drawer it belonged in, only that the 19 days were now 17, and that somewhere in this handsome, half-rebuilt house, a clock she could not see was running down towards something the whole county would be gathered to witness. By the second week, the duel between them had a shape Hester had not expected and could not quite call unpleasant. Julian Farrow did not court her with compliments, which she would have distrusted, but with problems, which she found she trusted absolutely. He brought her the estate's fire watch schedule as though it were a bouquet, dropped into her lap across the library table, with the wary hope of a man offering the only currency he had left. "Tell me what is wrong with it," he said. "Everyone else tells me it is thorough." She read it twice before she answered, because a thing worth saying was worth saying accurately. "It is thorough for a house that has 1 archive," she said. "You have 2. The old muniment room under the east stair is not on this schedule at all." He was quiet long enough that she thought she had offended him, until he said, low, "No one goes down there. It was where my brother liked to hide from his lessons." He did not say more, and she did not ask him to, only refolded the schedule and set it between them like a closed account waiting to be settled later. "Then it wants a watch precisely because no one goes there," she said. "The places people avoid out of grief are the same places thieves avoid out of luck. Fires do not care which reason keeps a room empty." Something crossed his face that she would later understand was the first small crack in 12 years of careful unwillingness to be helped, and he said, "You are not at all what I was told to expect." And she answered, because it was easier to be dry than to be moved, "No one ever is, Your Grace." That is rather the trouble with being told anything about a person before you have counted their doors yourself. It was the nearest thing to a joke he had risked since she arrived, and when, a beat later, he laughed, short, startled, entirely unrehearsed. Nurse Griggs, arranging flowers by the window with her back turned and her ears very much not, marked the date in her private, reckoning the way she marked every milestone that mattered, and said nothing to either of them, because some things were worth more kept than spoken. It was in the 3rd week, 12 days before the ball, that Lady Seraphina began speaking to the Duke of things Hester had said, and done in words Hester had not used, small distortions laid so gently into ordinary conversation that they hardly announced themselves as distortions at all. Miss Wren was asking such particular questions about the strong-room inventory, she told him over supper, smoothing her napkin the way she smoothed her gloves. "I confess I hardly knew where to look. One does not like to think ill of a bride, but a woman who counts the silver before the wedding is a woman with an eye to what she is marrying, is she not?" It was not a lie exactly, Hester had asked about the inventory, because she had found the scorch mark and the ghost of lamp oil and could not make herself stop pulling the thread. But it was the truth turned round to face the wrong direction, the way a portrait can be hung upside down and still, at a glance, read as a face. Julian said nothing to Hester of it that night, which she took, wrongly, for indifference, and which was in fact the opposite, a grief-armored man's oldest habit, deciding alone what wound to spare the people he had begun, against his own caution, to care for. The blow, when it came dressed as an accident. Hester had gone down to the old muniment room herself 3 nights before the ball, candle in hand, because the unwatched room had gone on troubling her the way an unlatched window troubles a light sleeper, and she meant only to look, to count, to file. She found the scorch marks continued down the stair, fresher than the ones in the hall. And beneath a loose flagstone by the archive door, a second ledger, bound in plain calf, hidden behind the true one, its entries in a careful, unfamiliar hand, recording sales of silver and canvas the Duke's own accounts showed still standing in his strong room. She had time only to read 3 lines of it before she heard footsteps on the stair above, and time only to slide the ledger back beneath its stone before Mr. Pruitt, the under-steward, found her there with her candle and her held breath, and reported, within the hour, to Lady Seraphina exactly what he had seen, and nothing of what he had not. By morning the story running the length of the servants' hall and up into the drawing-room was not that Miss Wren had discovered a fraud, but that Miss Wren had been found alone at midnight in the one room in the house where a fire would do the most irreplaceable harm, candle in hand, near a door that did not lock, and no explanation offered that did not sound, spoken aloud in daylight, exactly like the beginning of a confession. "I am not accusing you," Julian said to her, in the library, standing very still the way a man stands when he is holding something heavy and does not trust himself to set it down gently. "I am asking you to explain it to me." "I was counting," Hester said, and heard, even as she said it, how thin the true thing sounded beside the shape of the lie built around it. "I cannot yet tell you what I found. I need 1 more day." "You have had 3 weeks of my trust already," he said, and it was not unkind, which somehow made it worse. "And I find I do not know what to do with a woman who asks for my faith and will not spend an ounce of her own on me in return." She wanted, badly, to lay the ledger's 3 lines before him then and be done with it, but she had not finished counting, and a half-proof laid too early. She knew from 12 years of practice was worse than no proof at all. It only taught the guilty where to hide better. "Then don't trust me," she said instead, quiet, and it cost her more than anything she had said since arriving. "Trust the fire schedule. Watch the room yourself, tonight, and see who comes." He did not answer her, and the not answering sat between them like a held breath for 2 full days, in which Lady Seraphina moved through the house serene as unswept ash, and offered Hester, with every appearance of kindness, the exit that would have cost her nothing but her pride. "No one need know the whole of it," she said, finding Hester alone in the rose garden the morning after. "A quiet word to your father, a sudden change of heart before the ball, a return south before the county need ever whisper your name beside the word thief. I would see it done gently, my dear, for your sister's sake, if not your own." It was, Hester understood at once, both a bribe and a warning wearing the same gentle face, and she felt the old habit rise in her, the habit of going small, of disappearing rather than costing anyone anything, the habit her mother's counting had been built to fight rather than feed. "You are very kind to think of my sister," Hester said, "but I find I have grown tired of leaving rooms quietly to spare other people's comfort. I did that once when I was 12, and it did no good to anyone, least of all me. I believe I shall stay and be inconvenient instead." Lady Seraphina's smile did not falter, but her gloved hand, smoothing the fabric at her wrist, went still for a moment too long, and Hester, filing it as she filed everything, thought, that is not composure. That is a woman counting something of her own and coming up short. The letter from her father arrived the next morning, forwarded from the county post, and it undid more in Hester than 3 weeks of Lady Seraphina's gentleness had managed. Sir Aldous wrote seldom and worse, but he had heard, from Prudence, some garbled version of trouble at Alderley, and guilt or age or both had loosened something in him at last. "You were 12, he wrote, "and you rang the bell before any of us woke, and you carried your sister down the back stair yourself, while the rest of the house stood on the lawn accounting for itself. I let your stepmother's story stand, because my own grief could not bear to correct it, and that was a coward's silence I have owed you an apology for every year since. Ring your bell, Hester. You were always the one who knew when to." She read it twice in the cold light of the window seat, and did not weep, because weeping had never been the shape her feeling took. She only sat very still, the letter in her lap, and felt 12 years of a story that was not true finish, at last coming apart. Nurse Griggs, finding her there, said only, "Well, now you know what I've known since you were a girl in a nightdress with soot on your hands, and nobody thought to ask you how you got it there." Hester folded the letter along its old creases. "Then it is time someone asked," she said, "and I do not intend to wait for them to think of it." She went to Julian that evening, not with an apology but with a plan, and found him already half persuaded, having sat 2 nights in the cold muniment room himself, and seen, on the second, Mr. Pruitt slip down the stair with a can of lamp oil he had no honest reason to be carrying. "I owe you an apology I have not yet earned the right to give properly," he said, before she could speak. "I will earn it after. Tonight I need the woman who counts doors." "Then you shall have her," Hester said, and told him what she meant to do, not to wait for the fire, but to be standing in its path when it came, with witnesses already summoned under the pretext of the ball's first guests arriving early, with Mr. Colquhoun, the family trustee, due that very evening for his audit, and thus a neutral eye already in the house, with the second ledger marked and ready to be produced the instant it was needed. Julian listened the way he had listened to the fire schedule that first week, without interrupting, and when she finished he said only, "You have been planning a war while the rest of us were planning a ball." And there was, beneath the grimness, something that might almost have been pride. The ball began at dusk on Michaelmas, with the whole county arriving in a river of carriage lamps, and Lady Seraphina moved among them radiant and immaculate as she had never once failed to be, while beneath the music the house waited on its own held breath. It was Mr. Pruitt who broke first, cornered by Julian and Mr. Colquhoun in the servants' passage while the dancing carried on obliviously overhead, sweating through his collar at a question put to him plainly and without heat. "Who told you to grease the north bell rope on Tuesday last?" Julian asked him, "and who paid you for the oil you carried down those stairs 2 nights ago?" Pruitt's mouth worked twice before the answer came, and when it came all in a rush, the way a dam does not leak but gives. "Lady Seraphina," he said. "She said the rope only wanted silencing till after the audit was done, my lord. She said no harm would come of it, she said. He did not finish, because the smell of smoke reached them then, thin and acrid, curling up the east stair from the muniment room exactly as the false ledger's hidden twin had promised it would." The house did not panic, because Hester had spent 3 weeks making certain it would not know how to. She was already moving before the first scream sounded in the ballroom above, already counting the nearest doors allowed to the footman nearest her, already directing the dancers toward the west lawn in an orderly current rather than a stampede, her voice pitched to carry without shouting, steady as a metronome over the rising alarm. "The east stair only," she called. "No one runs. Walk to the terrace doors, count your neighbor as you go, and something in the plain competence of it silenced the beginnings of panic before it could properly catch. The way her mother's voice must once have silenced a kitchen full of frightened servants 12 years and one lifetime ago. She found Julian at the muniment room door with 2 footmen and a line of water buckets already forming behind him, the fire small still, caught in a nest of oil-soaked ledgers Pruitt's hands had laid, and she went past him into the smoke without waiting to be told she might. Because she had counted this room's doors on her very first night and knew exactly where the true ledger lay beneath its flagstone, and exactly how many breaths she had to reach it. She came out coughing, ledger in her arms, the brass bell she had carried in her pocket every day since arriving falling loose against her palm as she pressed the book into Julian's hands, and it was that bell, ringing once, sharp and clear over the chaos as she stumbled. That brought the last stragglers off the stair before the ceiling above the archive gave way in a soft collapse of old timber and older smoke. They put the fire out within the half hour, more frightened than harmed, the archive scorched but the house entire, and it was in the smoke-hazed hush of the terrace, before the whole assembled county and Mr. Colquhoun with his spectacles and his notebook and his trustee's cold authority, that the true ledger was opened beside the false one and held to the torchlight side by side, the forged entries plain as a second face beneath a mask once you knew to look. Lady Seraphina did not run and did not deny it. She only watched the pages turn with the stillness of a woman watching a debt finally called that she had always known somewhere would be. "I gave this family 30 years, she said, when Colquhoun asked her plainly whether the hand was hers, and her voice for the first time in 3 weeks was not gentle at all, only tired, and buried the one pharaoh I loved best in a fire I was not permitted to grieve properly, because the wrong brother lived and the house needed a duchess found for him instead of a sister comforted. I was not stealing, Mr. Colquhoun. I was collecting what I was owed and never given. It was not an excuse, and no one at the tribunal mistook it for one, but it was true, and true things, however damning, are owed a listener's stillness. Julian, standing very straight beside Hester, let the silence hold a moment before he spoke, and when he did his voice had none of triumph in it. "You will have Alderley's cottage at Fenmere, and your annuity paid whole, and no magistrate need ever hear Pruitt's name beside yours," he said. "Not for your sake. For Peter's, he would not have wanted his name spent on your ruin." Seraphina's composure broke then, fully. For the first time anyone in that county had ever seen it break. And she wept without pretense into her ruined gloves while 2 footmen led her, gently, toward the carriage that would carry her out of the story she had tried to burn her way free of. It was full dark before Julian found Hester again, on the same terrace, the brass bell still warm from her hand, and he did not begin with an apology. Though he had promised her one, he began instead by taking the bell from her fingers, turning it once in the torchlight to read the initials worn faint into its side. "R.W.," he said. "Your mother's. She taught me to ring it before I was certain," Hester said. "I have spent 12 years being called nervous for doing exactly what she asked of me. Then I have been calling the wrong thing by the wrong name since the day you arrived," Julian said, "and I find I owe you a correction as much as an apology. I did not ask my aunt to find me a calm wife, whatever she told the county. I asked for someone who would ring the bell before she was certain and stay in the room after. I did not know, until tonight, that I had been given exactly that, and spent 3 weeks calling it nervousness because it frightened me less than calling it what it was." "And what was it?" Hester asked, though she thought she already knew, and wanted, this once, to hear it said aloud rather than filed away unspoken. Courage with better manners than mine, he said. And then, because the stakes were finally fully settled, the fire out, the fraud named, her name clean before every witness who mattered, he asked her the only question he had left that was not already answered by the events of the evening. Marry me because you choose it, Hester, not because your family had no better use for you, and not because I have none left for myself without you. I will not have you on any other terms, now that I have the choice to ask properly. She looked at him a long moment, the bell between their two hands, and answered with the only true thing she had. I have spent my whole life being given away for reasons that were never about me, she said. I should like, once, to be kept for one that is. Yes, the wedding, when it came a fortnight later, was small and quiet, exactly where the ball had been vast and burning. A country church, her father weeping openly for the first time in 12 years. Nurse Griggs sobbing into a handkerchief she pretended was only for the dust, Cordelia, arrived at last and genuinely glad, weeping too, and Miss Honoria Blackwood, seated near the back, sending afterward a short, honest letter, admitting she had misjudged the whole affair, and wishing them both better than she had wished them at the ball. Within the year she was engaged to a baronet 2 counties over who liked her precision better than Alderley ever had. Mr. Pruitt, who had cracked at the first honest question put to him, was given work on a distant tenant farm and a warning he would not need twice. Sir Aldous wrote every month after, awkward and faithful, and Lady Prudence, for her part, learned to speak of her nervous stepdaughter, the Duchess of Alderley, with an entirely new and untroubled pride, which surprised no one so much as it surprised Prudence herself. A year turned, near enough to the day, and the county gathered again at Alderley for the second Michaelmas ball since the fire, the archive rebuilt in stone this time. A small brass bell, mounted by its door under glass, with a plate reading only R.W. Ring first, and Hester Wren, now Pharaoh, stood at the same terrace door where she had first counted its exits a stranger, one hand resting easy on the frame instead of gripping it, watching her husband cross the lawn toward her with their small son asleep against his shoulder and no grief left on his face that the firelight could not answer with warmth instead of dread. And when he reached her he said, low, for her ear only, the thing he had first said to her in that very hall a year and a lifetime before, only inverted now, entire. I did not ask for calm, he said. I asked for true. I am glad, every day, that someone finally gave me the right sister. If this story warmed you, the quiet ones counted right at last. The bell rung before anyone else believed it needed ringing. Then stay a moment longer by the fire before you go. There is a chair kept, and the kettle is already on. Tell me, if you would, which line you'd have said in Hester's place at the terrace door, or whether you'd have rung the bell before you were certain too. Keep your place by this hearth for the next one. It costs nothing but a moment to stay close, and until then, go gently, and be the one who counts the doors for someone who has forgotten how.